Picture this. You've just spent like 3 hours wandering through a world-class museum.
Oh, I love a good museum day.
Right. You saw some breathtaking art, you read the plaques, but you also spent that entire time sharing recycled air with thousands of strangers.
Lots and lots of strangers.
Yeah, you shuffled shoulder to shoulder through crowded galleries, maybe waited in a stagnant line for the restroom, you packed into the elevator.
A total germ fest, basically.
Exactly. And then later that night, you're sitting on your couch reading a book and you feel it. A random, inexplicable chill.
Oh, we all know that feeling.
A slight, dry scratchiness at the very back of your throat. For you listening right now, in that exact moment, what do you usually do?
Well, most people instinctively default to one of two behaviors. They either, completely brush it off in denial.
Hoping it just magically disappears?
Right, exactly. Or they retreat. They grab a thick fleece blanket, curl up on the sofa, and passively wait to see if they're going to fall ill over the next 2 days.
And it is precisely that passive waiting period that we are challenging in this deep dive. We are exploring what you could call the missing half of viral prevention.
It's a huge gap in how we think about health.
It really is. So we're looking at a deeply analytical, hypothesis-driven position paper titled After the Museum, a Day-0 public health framework. It was authored by Lev Nemotin, PhD, and published on the N5 Digital and Isotone channel on May 25, 2026.
And before we get into the biology, we really need to clarify the scope. The author is absolutely not attacking museums. Cultural spaces aren't the enemy.
Right, we're not saying avoid art.
No, not at all.
Right.
Rather, museums serve as an incredibly useful, highly controlled model for studying high-density indoor respiratory exposure.
They're like a testing ground.
Exactly. They represent the perfect storm of human mixing. The goal of this framework isn't to make you terrified of art galleries or public spaces, but to give you a concrete, biologically grounded action plan for the moment you leave them.
Okay, let's unpack this missing half concept. Because when I think about how we are taught to handle viruses, the public health advice feels completely split into two distant extremes.
Very polarized.
Yeah. On one end, you have pre-exposure. That's getting vaccinated, wearing a mask on an airplane, washing your hands, or upgrading a building's HVAC system.
Right, that is the prophylactic layer. You are trying to stop the virus from ever gaining a foothold.
And on the completely opposite end, you have the post-exposure clinical illness phase. You wake up, you are coughing, your temperature is 101 degrees, and you are officially sick.
Yeah, and the advice there is clear. Stay home, drink fluids, take some medicine, and maybe call a doctor.
But there is a massive gaping void between those two states. You've been in a crowded room, you suspect exposure, and your body is giving you a very subtle warning sign, but you aren't officially sick yet.
That void is what the paper defines as the Day-0 window. And to understand why this specific window is a blind spot in public health, look at the scale of the environments we navigate.
They're massive.
The paper highlights the Metropolitan Museum of Art, which had, 5.7 million visitors in 2025.
Wow.
The Louvre had 8.7 million in 2024. That is an astonishing volume of international mixing, varying ventilation zones, and shared air.
Millions of people essentially swapping breath. But, a museum isn't a hospital ward.
And what's fascinating here is how public health advice usually fails when it ignores human behavior. In a hospital, everyone is acutely aware of infection control.
Right, you're on high alert.
But in a museum, the ecosystem is entirely different. People do not view themselves as patients or vectors. They are tourists. They are absorbed in the aesthetics.
Yeah, you're looking at paintings, not thinking about germs.
Exactly. They might linger in a packed, poorly ventilated exhibit for 45 minutes just to see a specific painting and then walk into a massive, cavernous atrium. Human behavior in these spaces naturally overrides risk mitigation.
Because you aren't calculating air changes per hour when you're looking at a Van Gogh.
No one does.
Let me play devil's advocate here. If the museum is just a proxy for any crowded indoor space, like a subway car, a theater, an open plan office, are we suggesting that every single time a person leaves a crowded room, they need to act like they've just been infected with a pathogen?
Well, no.
Because practically speaking, that sounds like a recipe for constant paranoia.
The framework is actually much more measured than that. The author advocates for what is termed a universal low-risk layer of hygiene post-exposure.
Okay, so what does that look like?
You leave the crowded subway, you avoid unnecessary chilling like standing in the freezing wind without a coat, You wash your hands, you stay hydrated.
This normal stuff.
Right, it's a baseline habit, not paranoia.
Yeah.
The protocol only shifts from that universal hygiene into a targeted biological intervention when you feel that very first subjective symptom.
The subjective chill, the sudden fatigue.
The scratchy throat, yeah. That marks the beginning of the day-eerie window. This is a very precise 24 to 48-hour period. The biological cascade has started, but the clinical disease, the full-blown systemic infection, is not yet fully established.
So the virus is in.
Yes. The viral particles have entered the respiratory tract, they're interacting with your mucosal barriers, and they are attempting to replicate.
Wait, let's pause on some of that terminology so we're totally clear. When you say mucosal barriers, what exactly is happening physically inside the nose or throat at this moment?
Think of your mucosal barrier as the first physical line of defense. It's the layer of mucus and the specialized epithelial cells lining your airway. It acts like a sticky moat.
A sticky moat. I like that.
When a virus like a rhinovirus enters, it tries to cross that moat, bind to the cells, hijack their machinery, and make thousands of copies of itself. Meanwhile, your body is initiating immune cell trafficking.
Immune cell trafficking meaning calling for backup, sending white blood cells to the area.
Essentially, yes. It is the complex process of recruiting specialized immune cells from your bloodstream and lymph nodes and directing them into the specific tissue, in this case your upper airway, to neutralize the threat.
I always think of this phase like a home security system. If the virus is a burglar, during this day-0 window, the burglar has managed to pry open a window to your house.
Great analogy.
Right. They are standing in the living room, but they haven't looted the place yet. They haven't disabled the main alarms or trashed the house.
Not yet.
So right now, it is a biological race between the burglar trying to multiply and your internal security system, that immune cell trafficking, trying to mobilize the guards to kick them out.
That is an excellent visualization of the race. And the most critical factor in determining who wins that race is the environment inside the house.
The temperature.
Specifically, the temperature of the airway. If we connect this to the bigger picture, temperature isn't a neutral variable. The paper points to experimental work demonstrating that cooler airway cell conditions actively impair our innate antiviral responses.
Wait, really?
Yes, when the physical temperature of your airway drops, it actually permits greater replication of rhinoviruses.
So if the virus is the burglar, a cold airway means the burglar can work twice as fast and our security guards are moving in slow motion.
Precisely. The enzymes that drive your immune response are temperature dependent. They function optimally at higher body temperatures.
That makes so much sense.
Right. This means when you feel that sudden chill early in the evening, your body is engaging its thermoregulation. The shivering isn't the virus hurting you, it is your brain recognizing a foreign threat and attempting to generate heat to slow the virus down.
Which completely flips how I think about getting sick. Because what do I do when I feel that chill? I go sit on the couch and throw a blanket over my laugh.
Which is the passive approach.
Yeah, but you're saying that by just sitting there passively, I am essentially neutralizing my body's own defense mechanism?
If we follow the burglar analogy, passive heating putting on a blanket is like waiting for the police to casually drive over while the burglar is already inside.
Oh, wow.
The blanket traps the heat you are already emitting, but it takes a significant amount of time to actually raise your core internal temperature. And if viral replication is accelerating exponentially, time is the one luxury you do not have.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If passive heating is too slow, what is the alternative? How do we give the security system an immediate advantage?
This is the core proposition of Dr. Morton's paper. He proposes a brief, controlled thermogenic and circulatory activation routine.
Thermogenic meaning heat generating.
Yes. Thermogenesis is simply the metabolic production of heat. In practical terms, deliberate muscular exertion.
Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
Because if I feel a cold coming on at 9 p.m. on a Tuesday, my body is tired, my throat hurts.
Of course.
The absolute last thing I am going to do is put on my sneakers, change into gym clothes, and go for a jog in the rain, or drive to a gym to lift weights. Behaviorally, that is a non-starter.
The author completely agrees. Standard exercise fails behaviorally at day-day. If the intervention requires ideal conditions, high motivation, or special equipment, it will simply never be used at the precise moment it is most needed.
Right, you'll just go back to the couch.
Exactly. That's why the paper outlines 4 strict, non-negotiable criteria for a viable Day-0 intervention.
What are they?
First, immediacy. You must be able to execute it the moment you feel the symptom without changing your environment. 2nd, intensity. It has to physically generate sufficient internal heat. 3rd, frequency. You must be able to execute it the moment you feel the symptom without changing your environment. 4th, intensity. It has to physically generate sufficient internal heat. 5th, frequency. You must be able to execute it the moment you feel the symptom without changing your environment. 6th, intensity. It has to physically generate sufficient internal heat.
Okay, and the third?
Third is practicality. It requires no complex gear or weather dependency. And fourth, compliance. It has to be accessible enough that a person who already feels slightly unwell will actually agree to do it.
Okay, but this brings up a huge red flag for me. If I am fighting off an infection, isn't raising my body temperature manually playing with fire? I've always been told that working out when you're sick is dangerous because it stresses your heart.
This is the most critical distinction in the entire framework, the dose problem. And it is vital to differentiate between a day-0 chill and a day-2 fever.
Because a fever means you already have a systemic inflammatory response.
Exactly. Your body has already reset its internal thermostat, and strenuous exercise at that point is indeed dangerous. But the day-0 chill is your body attempting to raise the temperature and struggling because you are sedentary.
So we want to help the body reach its target temperature quickly, but without pushing it over the edge into exhaustion.
Yes. The goal is rapid internal heating without harm. Passive warmth is too slow, but a grueling CrossFit workout will divert critical energy away from your immune system to repair muscle tissue.
So the dose has to be perfect.
The dose must be perfect. Furthermore, the paper strictly outlines safety exclusions. This thermogenic layer is absolutely not for individuals with acute chest pain, severe weakness, an established high fever, unstable cardiovascular disease, or respiratory compromise.
Okay, so be smart about it.
Right. If you feel dizzy or unusually short of breath, you stop immediately. It is a targeted biological assist, not an athletic performance.
We need an intervention that lives right in the Goldilocks zone. It has to be immediate, indoor, low friction, but intense enough to genuinely spike internal heat. And that brings us to the specific tool mentioned in the source material, isotone, from the author's N5 digital channel.
Right. Isotone is presented as a primary candidate because it specifically engineers a solution to the behavioral and physiological friction of the day-0 window. It is a compact, bidirectional resistance device.
I want to dig into the mechanics of this because why wouldn't I just do jumping jacks in my living room? If the goal is heat, jumping jacks make me sweat.
Sweating is actually your body's mechanism for dissipating heat, which is the opposite of what you want in this specific scenario.
No, that's a great point.
Plus, jumping jacks are high impact and exhausting,
Yeah.
which violates the compliance criterion when you feel fatigued. Isotone works differently through its bidirectional resistance. It involves two distinct phases of muscle engagement. First, there's a lower resistance squeezing phase. This acts like a muscular pump, promoting rapid circulatory activation and increasing venous return to the heart, which speeds up tissue perfusion.
Tissue perfusion, meaning we are physically pumping the blood and therefore those immune cells into the mucosal tissues faster, giving the security guards the golf cart.
Exactly. The second phase is a higher resistance expansion phase. This requires sustained isometric or eccentric muscular engagement. When your muscles hold a sustained load, they consume energy and generate significant metabolic heat internally.
But without the high aerobic output that causes you to pant, sweat profusely, and lose that heat to the surrounding air.
Got it.
So instead of a blanket trapping ambient heat, the muscles become a furnace heating the body from the inside out, while the pumping action circulates that newly heated blood directly to the cooler upper airway where the virus is trying to replicate.
And you can do this standing in your living room in your socks, without leaving the environment where you first noticed the symptoms. It solves the biological need and the behavioral bottleneck simultaneously.
But let's be careful here. Whenever someone introduces a physical device alongside a health protocol, it is incredibly easy for it to sound like a magic cure-all. You know, like, buy this gadget and you'll never catch a cold again.
This raises an important question. How do we prevent this from becoming pseudoscience? The author is highly vigilant about avoiding that trap. This framework is explicitly presented as a hypothesis.
Not a proven cure.
Right. Isotone is highlighted because it mathematically solves the dose and compliance problem, not because it has been definitively proven to cure the common cold. The transition from a logical hypothesis to an accepted medical protocol requires rigorous skepticism.
How does the paper suggest we actually prove this? Because I imagine it is incredibly difficult to run a clinical trial on a 24-hour window where the patient is just sitting in their own house feeling a little chilly.
It is notoriously difficult, which is why the paper outlines a meticulously structured 6-phase research pathway. It isn't just a blind call for testing. It provides a highly falsifiable methodology.
Falsifiable, meaning that the study is designed in a way that it can clearly fail if the hypothesis is wrong. That's the gold standard of science. Let's group these phases because the progression is brilliant.
The first major hurdle they tackle is simply measuring the invisible threat.
Right.
You're referring to phase 2, the development of the museum exposure score. Before you can test an intervention, you have to quantify the risk.
This part fascinated me because normally a doctor asks, were you around anyone sick? And you just guess. But the museum exposure score attempts to objectify that.
Yes.
It proposes tracking the total dwell time inside the venue, estimating the crowd density in the specific galleries you visited, factoring in the transit method like whether you took an empty cab or a packed subway.
And even using CO2 levels as a proxy.
Right. If a room has high CO2, it means you are breathing a higher percentage of air that just came out of someone else's lungs.
It creates a reproducible metric for respiratory exposure. Once you have that metric, the subsequent phases test the intervention sequentially.
So they test feasibility first.
Exactly. Phase 3 tests feasibility. If we give people this protocol, will they actually perform it when they feel fatigued? Phase 4 is purely physiological. Does this specific bidirectional routine actually raise core and airway temperatures safely compared to a control group just doing bodyweight squats or sitting under a blanket?
They are isolating the variables. They want to prove the furnace works before they check if it stops the burglar.
Exactly right. And if it does safely raise the temperature, phase 5 moves into prospective symptom tracking. And finally, phase 6 is the randomized controlled pilot study.
The final boss of medical testing.
This is where you measure the actual clinical endpoints. Do the people who use the thermogenic routine on day 0 experience a shorter duration of illness? Is their peak viral load lower?
And there's one specific clinical endpoint mentioned that really caught my eye. The paper discusses downstream targets, specifically preventing complications like acute sinusitis.
This is a vital public health angle. A massive burden on the healthcare system isn't just the initial 3-day cold, it's the secondary infections. Acute sinusitis often occurs because the initial viral infection causes profound inflammation in the nasal passages.
Which causes congestion, right?
Yes, this inflammation ramps up mucus production while simultaneously paralyzing the tiny hairs, the cilia, that normally clear that mucus out.
So you end up with a stagnant, blocked environment. To go back to our metaphor, the burglar didn't just break in. They clogged all the plumbing, turned on the faucets, and then left.
That's terrible, but accurate.
Now you have a flooded basement, which is the perfect environment for a totally different problem bacteria to move in and thrive.
A very apt extension of the metaphor. The hypothesis suggests that by intervening aggressively upstream, right at day 0, you might alter the early viral and inflammatory dynamics.
So stopping it before it floods.
Right. If the rapid internal heating slows down the viral replication enough for the immune system to clear it quickly, you might prevent that profound paralyzing inflammation from ever taking hold. You aren't just shortening a mild cold. You are potentially preventing the downstream bacterial infection that forces the patient to take antibiotics and miss a week of work.
So what does this all mean? When we step back and look at this entire journey, from the crowded halls of the Louvre to the biology of a rhinovirus to the mechanics of isometric heat generation, it challenges our fundamental posture toward getting sick. We do not have to be passive victims in those crucial 24 to 48 hours after an exposure.
It demands a paradigm shift. Prevention is not just a list of avoidance behaviors you practice when you are perfectly healthy, nor is it just lying dormant after you're already defeated.
It's an active step.
Exactly. This framework positions prevention as an active, precisely timed, biologically targeted behavior. By understanding the critical role that temperature plays in our airway defenses, and by identifying a safe, low-friction method to generate that internal heat, we introduce a powerful new dimension to public health.
It really empowers you, the listener. The next time you leave a crowded indoor space, whether it is an art museum, a sold-out concert, or a tightly packed commuter train, and you feel that sudden, inexplicable chill later that evening, observe your body.
Pay attention to what it's telling you.
Recognize that you are likely standing on the threshold of the Day-0 window. The burglar is at the window. Your body is sounding the alarm, trying to start the furnace. And based on Dr. Namoden's framework, your deliberate choice in that specific moment could radically alter the trajectory of your health over the next 2 weeks.
It certainly reframes the experience of a simple shiver.
It completely does. But before we wrap up, diving into all this science left me with one final, deeply provocative thought. It wasn't explicitly covered in the source text, but it builds directly on everything we've just discussed about temperature and viral replication.
Oh, I'm curious to hear where your mind went with this.
Well, If we accept the biology that cooler airway temperatures give respiratory viruses a distinct advantage during that day-D window, and we know that cold environments actively suppress our innate immune response, what does this imply about our modern societal obsession with highly air-conditioned, chronically overcooled public spaces?
Ah, the classic freezing office building.
Exactly. Think about the environments we force ourselves to inhabit. We sit in these aggressively air-conditioned offices, freezing movie theaters, and yes, massive climate control museums all summer long.
That's true, we do.
Are we inadvertently engineering the exact thermal environments that practically guarantee respiratory viruses win the biological race? By keeping these shared spaces at 68 degrees, we might be setting the thermostat to the exact temperature the burglar prefers.
That is a fascinating point.
Just something for you to ponder the next time you find yourself reaching for a heavy sweater in the middle of July. Stay curious, and remember, the next time you leave the museum with a chill, the race has already started.